5 and 6, it is me, Mr. A, back with story time for another day. Apologies for the lack of a story time video on Friday. I know you may feel left out because the infants in year 3 and 4 got one, and really I did try, but there was a certain small person encroaching on my every attempt to read your story, and it got to the point where I could take it no longer. So she's asleep now, so I've got this is why I'm doing this now. No, she hasn't been awake the whole time since Friday. It's now Sunday, but she hasn't been awake the whole time. But obviously, weekend. So anyway, Tom's Midnight Garden, Chapter 22, The Forgotten Promise. When Tom woke on Thursday morning, his first thought was that he had missed his precious chance of going back to the garden last night. His second thought was for the hiding place under the floorboards. Almost he thought that he must have dreamt of the discovery. But when he opened the cupboard door, there was the raised floorboard with the penknife beside it. He saw the 2 brown paper packages in the hole, drew them out and unwrapped them. They were a pair of skates, with boots still screwed and strapped to them. Then he saw a slip of paper left behind in the floor cavity. He brought it out and read what was written on it. To whomever may find this, these skates are the property of Harriet Melbourne, but she leaves them in this place in fulfilment of a promise she once made to a little boy. The note was signed and dated June 20th. The year was there too, but so smudged by the death of some insect that Tom could only read the first 2 numbers, a 1 and an 8. Tom spent a good deal of the day gloating over Hattie's skates, his skates. They were of an older fashion than Tom knew, and belonged to an older fashion of skating too. They were fen runners, whose blades end in a long curved prow to cut through the rougher surfaces of outdoor ice. As the skater travels mile after mile over the great frozen distances that the fens afford. He tended the skates as best he could. He said nothing to his uncle or aunt, but he looked for emery paper and at last found some in his uncle's toolbox, and he rubbed the rust off the skate blades. The blades ought to have been reground perhaps, but that was more than Tom could manage. He borrowed a bottle of olive oil from his aunt's larder and oiled the wooden footstock and the parched leather of the straps and the boots. He tried on the boots. They were almost a perfect fit. Perhaps a little on the large size, but that was all to the good. He could wear 2 pairs of socks inside them. While Tom was oiling the boots, the thing he had so long been seeking for came to him. The solution, rounded and perfect, of his problem of time. His aunt was out shopping, so that Tom was working with the olive oil quite openly on the kitchen table. The kitchen clock was facing him, staring at him intently. And suddenly Tom thought of that night, many nights ago now, when he had returned its gaze, at first with disbelief, and then with an immense wonder. The clock had told him then that, whereas he took several minutes to get downstairs to the garden door and then up again, he took no time at all to wander around the garden. However long a time he spent in the garden, the kitchen clock measured none of it. He spent time there without spending a fraction of a second of ordinary time. That was perhaps what the grandfather clock had meant by striking a 13th hour. The hours after the 12th do not exist in ordinary time. They are not bound by the laws of ordinary time. They are not over in 60 ordinary minutes. They are endless. Tom rubbed the oil along the straps, and his reasoning seemed smooth and right. He could spend an endless time in the garden if he liked. He could, after all, have both things, the garden and his family, because he could stay forever in the garden, and yet forever his family would be expecting him next Saturday afternoon. Time here would stand still at Thursday and wait for him. It would only start again if he left the garden and came back to the flat. I could stay in the garden forever, Tom told the kitchen clock, and laughed for joy, and then shivered a little, because forever sounded quite long and lonely. But anyway, he reasoned, tonight I could try it out. I could say just a few days or a few weeks or a year perhaps. But if I get tired of it, he really meant if he grew homesick, well then, I can always come back. And then there is another chance on Friday night. I can stay longer then, only come back after I've seen everything in the garden and done everything. Tom thought of all the delights of the garden while he tended his skates. By the time the work was done, he was settled in his mind and happy. He was ready for the night. Only one thing went badly amiss that Thursday. Just as he was getting into bed, he remembered, "I never wrote to Peter yesterday." "Never mind," said his aunt, tucking him up, "but I promised to." "Oh, it's bad to break a promise, but I'm sure you didn't mean to. Luckily it won't matter very much to Peter. Why, he'll be seeing you the day after tomorrow." Tom knew that it did matter. The broken promise was bad enough, but he knew as well that Peter would be feeling desperate without his letter. Peter needed all that Tom could write to him, to feed his imaginings, to feed his dreams. "Write to me more about the garden and Hattie," he had begged Tom. "Tell me what you did. Be sure to tell me what you're going to do." "Sorry, Peter," Tom murmured into his pillow, and felt wretched. He hoped that Peter had by now got over the bitterness of this betrayal. Peter went to bed earlier than Tom, so that probably he had already ended his day of disappointment with sleep. In this Tom was wrong. Peter was still awake, grieving. He had had no letter from Tom today, and he did not know why. Tom did not lightly forget promises. He did not know what Tom had been doing last night and the night before. He did not know what secrets Tom might now be master of. He did not know what wonderful things Tom might be doing this very night. Peter stared and stared across the half-darkness of his bedroom until his eyes blurred with tears and then cleared again. He longed more than ever he had done before to be with Tom, to know what he was doing. He fell asleep at last with that longing in his mind, and the last view that his eyes closed upon was Tom's postcard view of Eli on the bedroom mantelpiece opposite. Tom fell asleep too, but woke promptly when the time came. He put on his 2 pairs of socks. This time he left both of his bedroom slippers to wedge open the front door of the flat. Carrying the skates, he went downstairs. Of course, it was quite possible that the season outside was no longer winter, after all, and yet he felt sure that it was. When he opened the door, he found that he was right. A deep frost lay everywhere, binding fast the trees and all the plants of the garden, so that there seemed not the slightest movement or life. The garden might have been sculptured in stone. Such a frost there was. In the deep silence, Tom heard his name whispered hesitantly from behind him. He turned. Hattie was standing in the hall, dressed in thick, warm clothes, with a fur cap on her head and with a fur muff in which her hands were concealed. There you go, right, we'll leave it there for today. I'll be back again tomorrow with another bit, promise, okay? Thanks very much for reading. Do have a think as well. This story has some very similar themes. See if it reminds you of any stories that you know already, you might have heard in the past. All right. Thanks very much. Have a great day, and bye bye.